So great, now we have both GitHub and Google configured. Now we need to make sure that our project works with Next.js. So let's go back over to the documentation here. Let's scroll down to integrations and then choose Next.js. So one of the first things here that we have to do is to create an API route to use it with Next.js. So we're going to copy this piece of code and just note this directory path that we have to add in. So where API goes is inside of our app folder here. So source app, we're going to add a new folder, API, and then we're going to create a nested folder inside of there with auth, another folder with a square bracket to catch all here, and then a new file, route.ts, which we can paste in the information that we provided. Here they used @lib/auth, another reason to put your auth in libs. Okay, now we can move on to creating a client. We need to create a client instance. That way we can use the sign in and sign out methods that are available to us from BetterAuth. All right, back over to the documentation. After we've created our API route, we need to create a client instance. Here it recommends creating a auth client.ts file, put it inside of our library directory here. So all we need to do is copy the code here, go back to our code base, inside of our lib folder here, add in a new file, auth dash client.ts, paste that code in there, and we're ready to move on to the next step. We don't need any client configurations here. You're welcome to look at the documentation, and if you'd like to provide any, you're certainly welcome to. I believe that they put an extra space there. Strange. So yeah, let's move on to the next step. Back into the documentation, we're hitting a very important piece here, React server components and server actions. We don't use any server actions in this tutorial, or really any of my tutorials, to be completely honest. You're certainly welcome to use server actions if you'd like, and if you think it improves your code. But for me, I'm going to specifically be using React server components. So we can skip this portion here, move on down to this example here. In this example, they provide an example server component. Here we can see that this function is an asynchronous function. Here it's because getSession returns a promise, so we need to invoke await here to wait for the promise to resolve. We're making an API call over to our database and checking it to see if the user is currently authorized or not, if they're logged in as well. We have headers here, which is to resolve the response headers that we get back. And we get the user session data. In this conditional here, we are making an evaluation. If sessions exists, we fall through with this not here. If there's not of session of undefined, then we're not authenticated. Here, they're choosing to conditionally render things based off of if a person is authenticated. If they are, then we're able to get the user's name. Sometimes, and most often in my tutorial, you'll want to redirect the user, often to the login page if they're not authenticated and they're trying to access a page that requires authentication. So we'll often redirect them from that page. You could also display an error state by saying you're not authenticated, you need to log in. Here's a login button to then go over to login. So it's certainly up to you and how you want to design your website to handle these unauthorized, authorized potential redirects, such as if you're on the landing page. The converse would be if you're on a landing page, it's typically a public website, but if a user is already logged in, we might want to punt them over to the internal homepage for an authorized user. Then we can do a redirect to any form of authorized page. So we're not going to have to really worry about the rest of this, server action, cookies, any middleware. Us using Auth with Google and GitHub, they take care of most of that for us. So we're only going to need to be worrying about implementing this in our code. But before we actually get to implementing authorization, remember we skipped the database earlier. So we're going to do a little bit of cleanup of some of our front end so that we can do a little demonstration of login and ensuring that we can properly query our database. So let's jump back into the code and clean up some things. Going into our code here, we're going to close all the stuff that we don't need for now. So inside of our home page here, this looks like a good start for a login page. So we're going to make a quick transfer. We're going to create a route to login here. We're going to move this page.tsx into the newly created route of login here. So we're going to move it. We need to rename this because this is no longer the home page. This is now the login page. And I don't typically use function components, so we're going to switch this to an error function. Might as well do it now while we're doing a little bit of spring cleaning. We are going to change this from, we're not going to use email and password per my recommendations earlier. We're going to use GitHub and Google. So here we're going to say using your preferred auth provider. Or actually, instead of saying auth provider, we'll just say using your preferred login method, GitHub or Google. We can remove all this bit about the email and password, and we can get rid of the card footer. Consequently, we're going to get rid of some of the imports here. Great. Then we need a landing page here. A div. This is the landing page. So remember, in the URL, this would be at /, right? The login page would be at /login. And oh, that reminds me, I need to export default this as well. Export default login page. Let's add in export default landing page here before we forget. Then we need to add in a home page to finish out this login demo that we're going to do to test everything out. So we're going to create a home route here. Then we're going to create page.tsx and then do const home page here. And we're going to need this one. Return a div. Inside of it, this is the home page. And just to remember, it will be at /home in the URL for this page. All right, let's make sure that we export default this one as well. And we'll be ready to move on. Whoops, export default home page.